Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. We are live tonight from Helsinki, Finland, north enough that the sky is still glowing. Sun going up or down, not clear. President Trump was, of course, here today with Russian President Vladimir Putin. They concluded their first one-on-one summit meeting. We interviewed the president after they finished. We'll be showing you some excerpts throughout the show tonight with our full extended interview with the president tomorrow night on this show. At a press conference at the summit, the president hailed the meeting as a turning point in America-Russia relations. Here's part of it.
Our relationship has never been worse than it is now. However, that changed as of about 4 hours ago. I really believe that.
The president also addressed the Robert Mueller investigation into Russia collusion. Here's part of that.
I think that the probe is a disaster for our country. I think it's kept us apart. It's kept us separated. There was no collusion at all. Everybody knows it.
Fox News White House correspondent John Roberts is here, has been here all day in Helsinki, and he joins us now with the recap. Hey, John.
You know, the president's been looking forward to this for a long time because he said back during the campaign, I think it's important for the United States to have better relations with Russia. When you have so many nuclear warheads and so many of them are pointed at each other, isn't it better to get along than to not get along? But the president got roundly criticized today for sort of giving away the farm with Vladimir Putin. One of the things that he was criticized most for was not sticking up for U.S. intelligence when he was asked at that press conference who he believes on Russian meddling. The intelligence community of the United States, which has said that Russia definitely meddled in the 2016 election, or Vladimir Putin, who told him yet again that he didn't have anything to do with it. Listen here.
Dan Coates came to me and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be.
And after the president said that, Dan Coates came to him again today and said it's Russia. In a statement released, he said, quote, "We have been clear in our assessments of Russian meddling in the 2016 election and their ongoing pervasive efforts to undermine our democracy, and we will continue to provide unvarnished and objective intelligence in support of our national security." Something else, Tucker, that raised eyebrows ahead of the summit was when the president tweeted out that the relations between the United States and Russia are at a historic low, and the president blamed that on the United States, on stupidity and other things, and as well the Mueller investigation. When he was asked about that at the press conference, the president did not dial back much. Listen here.
I hold both countries responsible. I think that the United States has been foolish. I think we've all been foolish. We should have had this dialogue a long time ago, a long time, frankly, before I got to office. And I think we're all to blame.
Now, the president's remarks today and his posture with Vladimir Putin brought a lot of the expected criticism from Democrats, but many people in the Republican Party, particularly in the leadership, weren't very happy with what went on today. Listen to this from Paul Ryan. Quote, "The president must appreciate that Russia is not our ally. There is no moral equivalence between the United States and Russia, which remains hostile to our most basic values and ideas." The way that I read it, what happened today, Tucker, was he thought it was important to have a dialogue with Vladimir Putin, almost a parallel with Kim Jong-un, right, where he was willing to kind of rise above everything else that was going on out there, not get bogged down in the details of it, even though it would appear like he was sort of throwing, the intelligence community and other U.S. institutions under the bus for the sake of trying to build a better relationship, or at least get things back on track.
Certainly raised a lot of conversation. It'd be interesting to know if Paul Ryan believes that our ally Saudi Arabia shares our values and ideals. Maybe we'll have that conversation.
That's one of the questions that you are so famous for asking.
I'm interested. John Roberts, great to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Well, today's news conference, the president suggested he might be willing to believe Putin's denials that Russia meddled in our last presidential election. Watch.
So I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
Well, that set off a tidal wave of criticism. Former CIA Director John Brennan tweeted, and we're quoting, "Donald Trump's press conference performance in Helsinki rises to and exceeds the threshold of high crimes and misdemeanors," in other words, grounds for impeachment. And we're quoting now, "It was nothing short of treasonous. Not only were Trump's comments imbecilic, he is wholly in the pocket of Putin. Republican patriots, Where are you? What to make of all this? Joining us now is a man who has covered several Russia-U.S. summits around the world. NYU professor emeritus and Nation contributing editor Stephen Cohen, one of the country's preeminent Russia scholars. Professor Cohen, thanks a lot for joining us. Assess, if you would, the reaction today to this press conference and to the summit between Putin and Trump.
The reaction by most of the media, by the Democrats, by the anti-Trump people, is like mob violence. I've never seen anything like it in my life. This is the President of the United States doing what every president, Tucker, since Franklin Delano Roosevelt did in 1943 with Stalin, meeting with the head of the Kremlin. And every president since Eisenhower, a Republican by the way, has met with the leader of the Kremlin for one existential purpose: to avoid war between the two nuclear superpowers. Today, in my considered scholarly long-time judgment, relations between the United States and Russia are more dangerous than they have ever, let me repeat, ever been, including the Cuban Missile Crisis. I want my president to do, I didn't vote for this president, but I want my president to do what every other president has done. Sit with the head of the other nuclear superpower and walk back the conflicts that could lead to war, whether they be in Syria, Ukraine, in the Baltic nations, in these accusations of cyber attacks. Every president has been encouraged to do that and applauded by both parties, not Trump. Look what they did to him today. They held a kangaroo court. They found him guilty. And then you have the former head of the United States CIA, who himself ought to be put under oath and asked about his role in inventing Russiagate, calling the President of the United States treasonous. What have we come to in this country? And what's going to happen in the future?
Well, those are questions that adults ought to be discussing, I think. But tell me if my assessment is wrong. It seems almost as if some in our leadership class on both sides, Republicans and Democrats, seek increased conflict with Russia. Do you think that's right? And if it is, why?
All right, you've asked a fundamental question. Do they know what they're doing? I don't know. They seem to hate or resent the idea of Trump as president, that they've all lost all sense of American national security. I would ask them a question. If you ever get these people on, ask them this question for yourself, for me, for the nation. Do you, these people who are hunting Trump, do you prefer trying to impeach Trump to trying to avert war with nuclear Russia? That's the bottom line. And that's where we're at today. Because when I listen to why they denounced the summit, that's what they're doing.
Look, and I'm in no way defending Russia about, with which I have no connection whatsoever. And I'm basically agnostic, and I take it as a matter of faith that they seek to influence the U.S. government, undermine our elections. None of that surprises me at all. I just don't understand why Russia uniquely is considered an unacceptable partner for conversation, while at the same time we are happy to have close, intimate relations with Saudi Arabia, for example, the government of China, for example, both more repressive than the government of Russia. I'm missing this. Why the emphasis on Russia?
People have written books about this, historians. Why is it that Russia seems to be our wicked witch of the East, when Russia has more in common with the United States? It's a Christian country. It's a big country. It was a frontier country. We were allies during World War II. I mean, Russia, this will upset people, but historically, Russia defeated Nazi Germany in Europe. We defeated the Japanese in the Pacific. We were great allies. After that, things went bad. Who's to blame? Historians have written lots of books. But why, since the end of the Soviet Union, there's no communism? Let me ask you a question. You know, DC, why do these people dislike Putin, the president of post-communist Russia, more than they ever seem to dislike the communist leaders? It's more about us, Tucker, than it's about them. And this is really dangerous, not permitting the president of the United States to keep us safe.
And I think it is no defense of Putin to ask that exact question. I'm just going to repeat it for our viewers in case they missed it. Why do so many people in charge now dislike the current leader of Russia more than they dislike the communists who killed tens of millions? I don't know. I can't answer it, but thank you for asking.
There is an answer, Professor, but we would need a lot of time. And a psychiatrist.
Well, we'll have it. I hope you'll come back.
And a psychiatrist.
Thank you. Great to see you, Professor Stephen Cohen. Well, in response to the day's events, the left has adopted hatred of Russia as the new litmus test, the single litmus test for patriotism as an American. Unless you agree with them, you are not a good American. Some of us resent that. Some on the left are even willing to demand a military government in our country as long as it's sufficiently anti-Moscow. Think we're overstating? We're not. Stephen Cohen, a different one, this one an elected representative, a Democrat from Memphis, Tennessee, tweeted this today, quote, "Where are our military folks? The commander-in-chief is in the hands of our enemy." So here you have an elected representative calling for a military coup in our country in the name of democracy. Richard Goodstein is a lawyer. He advised both Hillary Clinton's presidential campaigns. He joins us tonight. Are you comfortable with that, Richard? No. Here you have an elected official calling for a military coup in the name of preserving democracy. Now, look, there are parts of the press conference I didn't care for, but that's a different level of extremism. Calling for a coup? I haven't heard anyone mention that. This is a member of Congress. What do you think of that?
I don't think that Stephen Cohen of Tennessee is calling, if you know him, he's not calling for any kind of military coups. Here's
what was he saying? Wait, hold on. What was he saying?
He's saying the president took an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the United States of America. Dick Cheney said
that's not what he said. He said, and I'm quoting, I'm looking at it, "Where are our military folks? The president is in the hands of the enemy." He's calling on the United States military, which, of course, serves under the president of the United States, to take action to rectify this situation where the president is in the hands of the enemy. That's lunatic.
No.
Okay? This is a member of Congress. You can't concede that that's lunatic? That's crazy?
I think the point he's trying to make is the following. For Donald Trump to be standing right next to Putin and be incapable, the guy who said, "You're fired," is incapable of challenging face-to-face anybody. He couldn't do it at the G7, he couldn't do it at NATO, and he couldn't do it today. And again, fine. Dick Cheney is the one. Let me just finish the sentence. Dick Cheney said this attack by the Russians was an act of war. So what Stephen Cohen is basically saying is Putin, I mean, for whatever he's got on Trump or nothing, Trump seems to be doing his bidding. And that's of concern to every American.
Wait, you know what? No, hold on. No. Maybe he has a different view of it than you do. That does not make him a traitor to his country. That does not make him a quisling. It does not make him someone who should be overthrown by a military coup. People have policy differences. Some people think Russia is the preeminent threat to America. Others don't. Trump is in the latter category. That does not make him a traitor.
Well, I didn't say
do you understand the distinction? Or have we gotten to a place where it's okay to call people traitors if you disagree with their policy?
No. Listen, Tucker, Newt Gingrich and Mitt Romney, and go through the list of McConnell
care what party
and Paul
there
Ryan.
is.
I know you don't care what they say, but
care.
They're not lefties. Okay, you can't assign.
I'm not saying they are. No, but I'm not. You're totally missing it. This is not a left-right thing. This is a neocon realist thing.
Well,
so people who thought the Iraq War was a great idea and think that we should overthrow Assad in Syria and barge into Lebanon and remake the world and hope it works this time, those people are deeply offended. It's not a left-right thing. It's a ruling class versus everybody else thing. And you know that. But can we just pull back from calling each other traitors?
Absolutely. But I would quote your Fox colleague, Neil Cavuto, who said it's disgusting. And it's not a left-right thing. He said it's a right or wrong thing. And I agree with him. It's wrong.
That's okay. You may think it's wrong. But we should establish a line. And the line is this. You don't call people unpatriotic for the crime of disagreeing with you. Like, for example, I'll ask you this question. Do you really believe that there's no defense of Russia? I'm not that interested in Russia. But do you really believe they're a preeminent enemy in the world? Bigger than China? Do you really think they're the most immoral country in the world? More immoral than Saudi Arabia? Do you really think that? Because everyone on television is pretending that today. Why?
Sorry that I'm using Dick Cheney as a frame of reference. He's the one who said what the Russians did was an act of war.
I'm asking.
China actually hasn't done acts of war. I'm asking what you think. Against us.
So China is less. No, but let's have an adult conversation really quick. In 1 minute we have. Do you really believe that Russia is a greater threat to America's interests than China?
I think that that Russia,
Say that
left
with
to
a
its
straight
own
face, I dare you.
devices, I think left to its own devices, Russia would undermine our democracy. I think China would take us on economically, happily, okay? But I don't think China is out to get us.
But they're not really a threat to us.
Well, I'm just saying.
Because everyone in D.C. is on their payroll.
And I
As
think
you know.
And for every day that Donald Trump shows himself unable to stand up to Putin, every foreign leader in the world is going, hell, maybe we should kind of gain some ground in the U.S. too. That's the concern.
Yeah. I'm a little baffled by the lack of perspective. And again, by the way, I've never for a minute doubted and never will doubt that Russia seeks to undermine us. They have for 100 years. They'll continue to do it. But, let's be real. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, Richard, thank you. Great to see you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
After the press conference today, the president sat down with us for an interview. He had a lot to say, not just about Russia, but primarily about immigration and its effect on Europe. Here's part of it.
The Democrats want open borders, which is basically saying we want open borders, we want crime.
Why do you think they want that?
Maybe it's a political philosophy that they grew up with. Maybe they learned it at school. Maybe they're fools. I don't know.
The full extended interview airing tomorrow night at 8 p.m. It's interesting. Tune in then. Up next, the press and all the geniuses who've managed our foreign policy over the past 30 years, done a great job, had a full meltdown today over the news conference, stopping just short of demanding a new war. What to make of their reaction? We'll tell you when we return.
We discussed this also. Zero collusion, and it has had a negative impact upon the relationship of the two largest nuclear powers in the world.
Tucker.
You have been watching perhaps one of the most disgraceful performances by an American president at a summit in front of a Russian leader, certainly that I've ever seen.
Putin has recruited psychologically the president of the United States.
I have never seen an American president simply surrender to the leader of Russia. You should call this the Surrender Summit.
When do we see almost a shadow government come out and say, we cannot side with the government, whether it's the cabinet or the Senate? I think that's the big question.
Who let all the dumb people on TV? It's like the question we ask every night. More so today than maybe before, certainly in a long time. The reaction in the press to the summit today was so over the top that it was awe-inspiring, but the reaction of politicians was even more so. Chuck Schumer, who holds elected office in the United States Senate, suggested that Vladimir Putin is literally blackmailing the President of the United States. He did not provide evidence for that charge. Nancy Pelosi in the House went even further. She said that today was ironclad proof that Russia has something on President Trump. Wasn't a lot of reasoned discourse going on today, to put it mildly. Tammy Bruce is a reasoned person. She's a radio show host in New York, a friend of this show, and she joins us tonight. Tammy, what do you make of this?
You know, it's fascinating. Look, in President Trump's press conference, there's something we all didn't like necessarily. But the reaction, the overreaction, is extraordinary. Keep in mind, these are the people who said that the tax cuts were going to cause Armageddon, that the end of net neutrality was going to literally kill people, that President Trump meeting with North Korea was going to cause World War III. And now we've got this, a press conference after a 4-hour meeting. Is supposedly treason, or at least as you've noted from a Congress member, should require a military coup. The American people at this point know something, and that is, with all the work he's done so far, with whatever disagreements you may have with President Trump, he loves this country, and he is working for this country. And that is clear. So when you see this kind of hysterical reaction multiplied, it worries the American people. And if their reaction is supposedly about national security and how the nation is viewed, how is this country viewed when you do have elected officials suggesting a coup either via shadow government or through the military or denigrating the president so publicly? If that was the concern, my point is that this, of course, is politics. It's not about national security.
But they seem to mean it. I mean, they seem desperate to force me to believe, as basically a Russia agnostic. I have no interest in going to Russia. I'm not interested in Russia. But they're trying to force me to believe that Russia is the worst country in the world, the greatest threat to my liberty, the greatest threat to the United States of America. Well, that's just stupid. Like, anyone who pays any attention knows that's not true. So why it's not a defense of Russia, but it's just not, China's a much bigger threat. So why are they trying to force me to believe that and punish me if I don't nod in agreement? I don't understand.
Because that was their first premise. They've based everything on Russia controlling Donald Trump. That was their premise for the first 6 months, was to get him either to resign or to get him impeached. And look, the Russians, we agree, we know, did meddle. And we know that there's like that theme of basic reality that Obama did nothing about, issued stand-down orders to Susan Rice. We know that through congressional testimony. And so we know that that's occurred. The president, it tends to bring the two together, which is this unfair witch hunt versus the actual dynamic of meddling in this country, which, by the way, it really had no impact. That's clear. But in the meantime, the Democrat Party, the never-Trumpers, the establishment, invested in this fantasy of the president, Donald Trump, being controlled by the Russians, which, of course, is absurd. And his performance over the last over 500 days has proven his commitment to this nation. So this is their only investment. This is what they have. And they clearly are indicating the level of their panic and need for this to be the case. And the American people have rejected it before, and I think they'll reject it again.
It seems a little disproportionate, to be totally honest, to put it mildly. So also during his press conference today, the president raised once again the matter of the DNC's email server, which we're told was hacked by Russia. We're required to believe that, too. But for some reason, it was never turned over to the FBI. Here's part of what the president said.
You have groups that are wondering why the FBI never took the server. Haven't they taken the server? Why was the FBI told to leave the office of the Democratic National Committee? I've been wondering that. I've been asking that for months and months, and I've been tweeting it out and calling it out on social media. Where is the server? I want to know, where is the server, and what is the server saying? With that being said, all I can do is ask the question.
Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton made another appearance to remind the world that she ought to be president. Yesterday, she tweeted this: "Great World Cup. Question for President Trump as he meets Putin. Do you know which team you play for?" So I'm interested, Tammy, in this question of the server. I wouldn't be shocked if Russia tampered with it. They've been causing mischief in this country for 100 years. So that would not surprise me. But why is it considered unpatriotic to ask basic questions like, well, where's the server? Did you look at it? Why didn't the FBI look at it? Can you answer my basic questions? Why am I not allowed to ask those questions? I'm working for Putin if I do. I don't have a right as an American citizen to get straight answers to simple questions? Yeah, look, actually, we believe the server may have been decommissioned and actually taken apart. This is news from April of this year, and a filing from the DNC that they were required to decommission or remove software and take apart about 140 servers, 180 computers, and 11 separate servers. So it may actually not even exist at this point. But for the president, and I think that this is key, the Americans know that he loves the country. They know that it's hogwash what they're hearing from the media today. But the president, I think, would, help put this kind of situation to bed, if you will, by addressing the fact that, yes, there is meddling, and that what's happening here on the political end is very different and has nothing to do with the fact that he won this election fair and square, but that there are questions that we have to ask about the politics that have invaded this. The Peter Strzok testimony from yesterday, shocking. And I think that this is where the American people deserve answers. But I just want my specific questions answered. It's one thing to say, oh, they hacked or they tampered. I believe that completely. But tell me what that means. Why don't you be very specific about it? Nobody will. Oh, you're working for Putin. When people won't be specific to simple questions, you know there's deceit. That's my view. Yeah, the president's going to hear these complaints, and I think so will the FBI. I hope so. Yeah. Great to see you. Tammy Bruce. Well, Lisa Page returned to Capitol Hill today for the second day of testimony about bias at the FBI. We'll talk to a congressman who was there for that. That's next. We're coming back to you live from Helsinki, Finland, late at night, sun rising anyway. Of course, this was the site of the Vladimir Putin-Donald Trump summit earlier today, just finished. Back in Washington, meanwhile, former FBI agent Lisa Page returned to Capitol Hill. She has appeared to 2 House committees behind closed doors to deliver further testimony about her behavior at the FBI over the last couple of years when she and Peter Strzok routinely sent highly political messages to one another, in one case promising to derail the Trump campaign. Congressman Darrell Issa represents the state of California. He sits on the House Judiciary Committee. He heard Page's testimony today, and he joins us tonight. Congressman, thank you very much for coming on. So what can you tell us about what Lisa Page said?
Well, first of all, I was surprised how smart she is and how poised she is. She is one smart attorney, and I say that not in any way except to say she was much better witness for her own purposes. Very careful, very poised. What we did see, though, is things like, and I can't speak to the questions and answers as you can understand, but she would look over and put her hand out for the FBI lawyer there to object anytime she saw an opening for that objection. She was literally prompting for those. And I found that to be pretty reprehensible. She no longer works for them, and it's not her job to determine those so-called equities that are being invented by the FBI as some sort of a privilege.
Now, most of us have seen a partial transcript of her text exchanges with her boyfriend or former boyfriend. And so we have a pretty clear picture of her political views and the intensity of those views. Give us a picture of her involvement in the Russia investigation. How close to the center of that was she? How influential was she? How meaningful was her participation?
Well, this is something that she said in general, she said constantly, which is she kept wanting to reduce her importance. She went on at length about how many people changed between investigations and how there were too many other people for her, per se, to have had an influence. But let's remember, Peter Strzok looked at us and said he didn't have a bias, he didn't do anything, but he had no answer for why it was his computer that downgraded Hillary Clinton's misuse from a crime to a non-crime. Literally, that report was changed on his computer. So they were critical. They teamed up together, and there really wasn't an answer to that in any of her testimony, only an obfuscation of her importance.
Remarkable. Thank you very much, Congressman, for coming on and giving us that window into it. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tucker.
Jonathan Turley is, of course, a professor at George Washington University Law School. He's been watching this saga from the very beginning, from a pretty non-aligned point of view, I would say, and he joins us tonight. So what do you make of, and I think you do have a pretty non-aligned point of view. I don't even know what your politics are. What do you make of the most recent developments with Lisa Page?
Well, I've also heard that she acquitted herself quite well, and yes. I think that's much to her credit. The problem is that we haven't seen a significant movement of the ball after the hearings that we've had. Peter Strzok refused to answer on at the insistence of the FBI most of the material questions. I mean, that it was quite surprising that anything that actually came close to answering the questions that most of us wanted answered, there would come an objection from the FBI. And I have to say, the FBI was well off the navigational map, in my view, in terms of privileges. They spoke of all these equities and having to follow these the investigatory privileges. None of that tracked very well to me. This was a closed investigation, but more importantly, this is an oversight committee. I thought it was a particularly strange scene to have this oversight committee speaking to a government employee and having this mantra of, I'd love to answer, but the FBI won't let me. So I'm hoping that the committee is going to pursue that aggressively, because it got very little because the FBI was issuing these objections.
I mean, is that that doesn't, you're the constitutional scholar, not I, but it doesn't seem like that's the way the system is supposed to work. This is an elected body. This is the lawmaking body. This is the core of our democracy. Speaking of our democracy, getting the finger from a federal employee. Like, how can that happen?
It's not supposed to happen this way. Look, there's always tension between the executive branch and legislative branches in Democratic and Republican administrations. There's a lot of objections that are made, and most of them are worked through. But this is a very different situation where you have a closed investigation, a matter of tremendous national significance, an oversight committee that has clearly reasonable requests here to get answers to these questions. The FBI would lose. If this goes to the courts, most of these questions would have to be answered. So it leaves you with this question again of why at this stage is the FBI making these sweeping objections and shutting off this information? I just don't see it.
Well, you don't want to live in a country where federal agencies get to decide, how they can behave unilaterally. That's not democracy. Another thing, very quickly, Robert Mueller's investigation obviously indicted several more Russians this past week for various crimes. We're still missing something critically that supposedly justified this investigation, which is collusion. Do you think that is a prerequisite for a successful investigation? In other words, if we get to the end of this and there's no collusion uncovered, can we say it was a worthy exercise?
Well, I guess that's a good question. Look, the indictment's an important one. There's lots of crimes here. There's just not a lot of collusion. There's criminals, but not colluders. And so, yeah, it's good that we're identifying these criminals. What the FBI did with these Russians was a great service to this nation. But I think you can say that and still acknowledge what the president is saying, that after two massive indictments, and these are speaking indictments, so they're very detailed, there's really not a direct connection of collusion to the campaign itself. Now, you can say that. Doesn't mean that they're not going to establish it, but you can recognize that. Now, am I glad that Robert Mueller is investigating all of this? You bet. I'm glad that indictment came down. The Russians really needed to be identified, and they did a great job. But this is not, when people say this is a witch hunt, there's obviously witches in those woods. We just indicted a bunch of them. The question is, which witches are we looking for? And these are not the colluders.
There are witches from many different countries, by the way, in our
That's
woods.
right.
And if we're going to go after some, let's go after them all. That's my view, but whatever. Professor, great to see you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Well, during an interview with the president, he blasted FBI agent Strzok and Page, as well as former CIA Director John Brennan, accused them of acting out of malice. Here's part of that.
I think Brennan's a very bad guy, and if you look at it, a lot of things happened under his watch. I think he's a very bad person. I also think that when you watch Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, when you watch all of the things that have happened, Comey, take a look at that, and McCabe, who's got some pretty big problems, I assume. You look at the deception, the lies. These are people that, in my opinion, they're bad people, and they're being exposed for what they are.
That's part of a much longer interview. The entire extended version airs tomorrow night at 8 p.m. We hope you'll watch. Up next, a top actress in Hollywood under fire for wanting to do her job, which of course is acting. We're going to talk to a writer who was censored by her own publication for trying to defend her. It's an amazing story. That writer joins us next. Hollywood has always been political, always been on the left, but in the last year and a half or so, things have spun completely out of control. A political movement has become a revolution, and like all revolutions, it is eating itself. Even the biggest Hollywood stars are no longer safe from the mobs they created. For example, actress Scarlett Johansson was supposed to play a transgendered person in an upcoming film, but had to quit the role after left-wing activists attacked her for not giving that role to someone who was actually transgendered. Well, Daniela Greenbaum is a writer, and until a few days ago, she worked at Business Insider. She wrote a piece defending Scarlett Johansson for taking the role. She said she's an actor, she should be allowed to act. But Business Insider, under pressure from activists, deleted the piece, and she resigned in protest. Daniela Greenbaum joins us tonight. Daniela, it's kind of an amazing story. Give us the quick outline. So your piece, basically, I hope I'm not mischaracterizing it, said this is an actor who is paid to portray other people. That's what she seeks to do here. There's nothing wrong with that. Was that your argument, basically?
Yes, I thought that I wrote something totally benign, and I basically said actors are paid to represent people who aren't themselves. That's what she's been hired to do, and I don't understand the outrage, frankly.
Well, I mean, it's sort of an unimpeachable point. How did Business Insider, Nicholas Carlson, I think, was your editor over there, how did he respond? What did he say to you? What was wrong with that piece?
Well, Nick is the editor-in-chief over there, and about, I don't know, maybe 3, 4, 5 hours after the piece went up on a Friday morning, I got on a call with him and some of the other senior staff there, and they informed me that many of my colleagues had written them letters, very upset at the point I had made and how I had made it, and ultimately they decided to take the piece down.
What were they upset about? I mean, did they have a case against your point?
Well, Frankly, I don't really understand their point, but I think most of it was rooted in that I did not give serious consideration to the point being made by the other side that maybe because transgender people face discrimination in other walks of life, the film industry somehow owes it to them to find them these jobs, or that, quote unquote, that their narratives are being stolen. And my argument was acting is about stealing narratives, right? We don't cast people to represent themselves, and so this should not be treated any differently.
So did they ever fully flesh out their point of view, or was it just the kind of sense that you'd violated some rule that decent people don't violate? You said something naughty, therefore, like, we're punishing you?
Well, I was forwarded some of the letters that my colleagues had written, I guess the ones that had said, you know, we're fine with Daniela seeing that we wrote this. And again, they made the argument that there are limited roles for transgender people, and, you know, they're limited roles rather that portray transgender people, and that therefore they should somehow have first dibs. And my argument was, yes.
Well, I'm just worried. We're almost out of time, and since you practice journalism,
yes.
I mean, what does it do to journalism? I mean, our audience can assess, but I think you're making a totally moderate, reasonable point. You don't seem crazy at all. I think most people would agree. If you can't say something that obvious and sensible, like, can you practice journalism in an environment like that?
Well, the thing is that I always thought I was inoculated against this kind of silencing because I do identify as moderate. I mean, I'm right of center, but I'm pretty moderate. And so I was naive to think that I was sort of immune from this kind of attack. But the reality is that each victory that this mob claims just strengthens them and reminds them of their own strength. And so I don't think anyone is safe from this kind of attack.
That's exactly right. That's a really smart point. Godspeed. I hope you find employment somewhere much better than Business Insider. Thank you, Daniela. Well, the New York Times attacked the summit you saw today by releasing a bizarre, overtly sexual cartoon. It was really strange, and we're going to unpack what it might mean next.
Nick.
Well, in honor of today's summit here in Helsinki, the New York Times, a newspaper in the United States, released a cartoon portraying President Trump and Vladimir Putin as gay lovers. The point was, it's wrong and shameful. But wait, this is the New York Times. They're not supposed to think that's wrong and shameful. What exactly were they saying? Joining us now is journalist Chadwick Moore, who we hope can sort this out for us. So they're using, Chadwick, the New York Times is using the suggestion of a gay relationship between these two as an attack on them. But you think of the New York Times as a paper that wouldn't attack people for being gay. What do you make of this?
Well, of course, it can't be homophobia because it's the New York Times, right? Then they're totally exempt from something like that. What I make of this is it's firstly extremely juvenile. You know, Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel are two other torchbearers of the dying and stale establishment culture who also have recently made gay sex jokes about President Trump. And it's the sort of behavior that is tailor-made for a Huffington Post think piece about the history of gays as a punchline, about how cartoons are, you know, equate violence. Yet I haven't seen these think pieces. I wonder why they're not calling out their own side for attempting to make fun of gay people. Maybe when the left tries to bully a lot of these soy boys at the New York Times, maybe they were called gay on the playground, and maybe this is the only way they know how to bully someone back. I don't know.
But wait a second, aren't there all these highly funded groups in Washington that exist to stop this kind of stereotyping and sexual identity-based attacks on people? Where are they? I haven't seen any statements from them today.
That is a really wonderful question. There's an organization called GLAAD that was formed only to combat negative images of gay people in the media. GLAAD certainly come after me as a gay person plenty of times. I guess I'm a negative image of gay person in the media. But I haven't seen them going after this cartoon. I haven't seen them going after any left-wing celebrities who've made these crude homophobic jokes. And imagine if the New York Times had run, you know, a cartoon about Hillary and Vladimir Putin's relationship. Maybe they had a hot and heavy affair and a uranium baby popped out. What would the left be doing then? They'd be losing their minds. This is it's a typical hypocrisy that we continue to see from them. They turn a blind eye when their own side does it. It's time and time again. Gay seems to really be in the zeitgeist lately, with Joy Reid making homophobic remarks. Of course, she's immediately forgiven. You know, meanwhile, Vice President Pence says, you know, supports like years ago, and they still can't get over it.
I'm starting to think they're hypocrites. You're starting to convince me, Chadwick. Great to see you tonight.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Our entire extended interview with the president airs tomorrow. We have a preview of it, including what he said about Angela Merkel and Europe's migrant crisis. It's interesting, and it's next.